Welcome back to Space Atlas. Today we are diving into a story that makes Oumuamua look like a child's toy, a sequence of events so baffling that it threatens to rewrite the entire history of our solar system. We need to talk about July 2025, a month that started quietly in the astronomical community but ended with a revelation that has kept scientists awake for weeks. When astronomers first catalogued the object known as 3I Atlas, the world barely noticed, dismissing it as just another rock tumbling through the void. It was classified as the third interstellar traveler ever detected, another piece of cosmic debris wandering through the vast emptiness between stars on a lonely, infinite road. By all appearances, it was nothing more than a silent visitor passing through the solar system on a one-way trip to nowhere. But then the James Webb Space Telescope, arguably the most powerful eye humanity has ever opened to the cosmos, locked onto it, and the narrative shattered. What the telescope saw changed everything we thought we knew about interstellar objects, transforming a boring rock into a terrifying mystery. This wasn't just an icy chunk of debris being passively warmed by the sun as it approached the inner system. Deep within the core of 3I Atlas, something was glowing, generating its own thermal signature against the cold backdrop of space. It wasn't glowing randomly or chaotically like a breaking comet, it was pulsing rhythmically like a heartbeat in the dark. As the days went by, what started as a strange curiosity began evolving into something far more disturbing for the teams analyzing the data. Brightness levels soared beyond any standard prediction models, defying the laws of cometary physics. The object began emitting thermal energy from within its own mass, completely independent of its sunlit surface. Then came the signals, distinct radio pulses repeating with a precision that can only be described as human or perhaps superhuman. And finally, the impossible happened. The object executed a course change that simply shouldn't be possible for a lifeless rock. This wasn't an object on a passive path responding to gravity. This was an object behaving with specific intent and possibly with awareness. Something is inside 3I Atlas, folks, and the James Webb Telescope may have just confirmed that it is alive. At first it was just a statistical outlier, a bright dot among many in the Webb Telescope's infrared feed that didn't quite fit the curve. But as the team reviewed the data from the InRSpec instrument, one anomaly refused to be dismissed or categorized as noise. 3I Atlas didn't behave like any other object we have ever seen floating in the vacuum of space. Typical interstellar visitors dim and brighten irregularly as they spin, eject material, or reflect sunlight unevenly from their icy surfaces. But 3I Atlas showed no such variability, maintaining a luminescent profile that felt artificial. Instead, its brightness remained eerily constant, defying the chaotic tumbling motion of natural asteroids. Even more alarming, the object emitted a centered, focused glow from its core, like a miniature furnace pulsing at exact intervals. Every 4 hours, the heat surged and faded in a perfectly timed cycle, mimicking a biological rhythm rather than a geological one. The pattern was too precise to be geological, lacking the randomness of venting gas or crumbling rock. It didn't correspond to rotation, solar wind, or any known natural process we have ever modeled in a computer simulation. It came from deep inside, completely unaffected by the changing angle of sunlight or the object's distance from the sun. Scientists publicly called it a thermal anomaly to keep the panic levels down in the press. But off the record, some began whispering another word in the halls of academia: heartbeat. The pulse was slow, deliberate, and mechanical, resonating not like a star's radiation, but like an engine breathing in deep space. Something inside this object was generating internal energy independent of external forces, acting like a power plant. And for those studying the patterns, one terrifying question began to emerge from the data. What kind of object powers itself in the dark, light years away from the nearest star? As the thermal data became impossible to ignore, radio astronomers joined the investigation to see if the object was speaking. Telescopes across the globe, from the vast arrays in South Africa to the dishes in California, aimed their receivers at 3I Atlas. For days, the feeds were clean, showing nothing but the static hiss of the cosmic background. Then came the breakthrough that turned skepticism into absolute shock. The Allen Telescope Array detected a faint, narrow-band signal, a consistent pulse emerging every 4 hours. This signal was perfectly synchronized with the thermal surges detected by Webb, linking the heat to the broadcast. At first, skepticism reigned supreme, as it always does when we talk about potential technosignatures. Could it be noise, an echo, or just some local interference bouncing off a satellite? But as hours turned to nights and nights into weeks, the signal did not waver once. It was steady, exact, and incredibly persistent, punching through the background noise with undeniable clarity. The pulse wasn't just present, it was adaptive, showing minute variations aligned with fluctuations in the solar wind. Multiple facilities confirmed the same pattern, effectively ruling out equipment error or human-made sources on Earth. And the repetition was simply too mathematically clean to be a natural phenomenon. Fourier analysis revealed a stable carrier wave, unlike anything naturally occurring in space, devoid of the jagged edges of natural radio emissions. It was as if something on board 3I Atlas was not just active, but trying to broadcast a presence. Teams attempted to match the signal to known pulsars, neutron stars, and cosmic background radiation sources. But every test returned negative, leaving the scientists with a blank sheet of paper and a growing sense of unease. There were no natural explanations left on the table, forcing them to consider the artificial. The last test involved sending a simple message back, a Hail Mary pass into the void. They transmitted a series of prime numbers, elements of the periodic table, and basic mathematical constants toward the object. 72 hours later, a reply arrived, distorted and faint, but undeniably present. It arrived on time to the second, accounting for the light speed delay perfectly. Something had heard us, and something had answered back in the language of mathematics. It was August 18th when everything changed again, escalating the situation from a curiosity to a crisis. Webb's continuous feed captured a sudden flare from 3I Atlas, a blinding flash in the infrared. This was an explosive surge of energy that increased the object's brightness by over 40% in less than an hour. No comet behaves like that, not even when erupting with jets of vapor or dust under intense solar heating. But even more shocking was what followed the explosion of light. A recalibration of the object's trajectory showed a subtle but undeniable course correction had occurred. 3I Atlas wasn't just drifting anymore, it was steering itself through the solar system. The change brought it closer to the ecliptic plane of the solar system, aligning it more precisely with the inner planets. The European Space Agency's orbital modelers, led by Marco Micheli, reran simulations in a desperate attempt to find a natural cause. They attempted to attribute the maneuver to outgassing or other physical processes like the Yarkovsky effect. But the math didn't fit. No matter how many times they crunched the numbers, the thrust required for such a shift was far greater than any natural jetting could produce without disintegrating the object, and more tellingly, the flare and the course change occurred simultaneously, as if one triggered the other. No known comet, asteroid, or interstellar object has ever altered its own trajectory with such precision. Not like this, and certainly not with such apparent purpose and timing. If something aboard 3I Atlas was responding to us, our signal, our instruments, our presence, then this was no longer just an observation. This was an encounter with an active intelligence or an automated system, and whatever was piloting this object had just made its first deliberate move toward us. In the aftermath of the flare and trajectory shift, attention turned frantically to the object's composition. Spectroscopic analysis was accelerated across all major observatories to determine what this thing was made of. The team at Johns Hopkins, led by Kerry Leese, began dissecting every wavelength Webb could deliver. What they found deepened the mystery tenfold, revealing a chemistry that shouldn't exist in a natural comet. While common comet elements like water ice, CO2, and carbon were present, they were masking something else. They were overlaid by absorption lines never before recorded in nature, signaling synthetic compounds. Some indicated the presence of metallic alloys, including rare earth elements used in advanced manufacturing here on Earth. Others hinted at quantum materials theorized in laboratories but never observed outside speculative physics papers. These weren't random cosmic compounds formed in the chaos of a protoplanetary disk. They were engineered, structured at a molecular level to behave in ways that natural materials cannot. Certain reflections in the infrared spectrum mimicked the optical profiles of metamaterials designed to bend light. This is the same kind of technology used in stealth applications to hide objects from sensors. In short, 3I Atlas wasn't just active, it was shielded and built. It wasn't just responding, it was constructed with a level of precision beyond anything humanity has ever produced. And if the materials are synthetic and the signals are deliberate, then the conversation changes. It is no longer a question of what asterisk 3i Atlas is, but rather a question of intent. The question now is who built it and why is it here in our backyard? While spectrometric analysis continued, researchers at Caltech's Deep Space Lab began a new experiment. They started experimenting with passive signal mapping, essentially listening to 3i Atlas across multiple wavelengths simultaneously. They wanted to detect any structural resonance that might reveal the internal layout of the object. What they discovered shook the scientific community to its core and silenced the skeptics. The object wasn't just emitting radio pulses, it was vibrating. Its entire mass was acting like a resonant chamber, humming in the void. Every few hours, a low-frequency hum reverberated across the X-band and microwave spectrum. This sound echoed back to Earth with a delay too consistent to be random noise. What's more disturbing is what happened when the signal was processed by audio engineers. When the signal was reversed, slowed down, and layered over a sonogram of human speech, it produced patterns. These patterns were eerily similar to language, possessing syntax and structure. It was not any known language, but it was structured and intelligible in a mathematical sense. It was as if something inside 3i Atlas was mimicking communication, trying to find a common frequency. Or worse, it was listening and learning, building a vocabulary based on our own transmissions. Some analysts believe the object isn't just reacting to signals, but integrating them. It appears to be aligning itself to the vibrational logic of human transmission. Perhaps it is preparing to speak in a way we can finally understand. But others fear a more chilling alternative regarding this voice. What we're hearing may not be the object itself, but something inside it, something stirring, waking, and preparing to emerge from its long slumber. A new round of infrared imaging from the James Webb Space Telescope revealed something even more baffling. Deep within the heat map of 3i Atlas, scientists observed a moving internal structure. It was not random, not fluid, but spiral-shaped, rotating with unnatural consistency. The spiral was dense, smooth, and regular, appearing mechanically constructed rather than naturally formed. Its movement was not reactive, like you'd expect from shifting debris inside a tumbling mass. It was autonomous, rotating on an axis that remained steady even as the object itself spun freely through space. This internal core seemed unaffected by inertia, suggesting some form of inertial dampening. It implies internal gravity control, technologies we've only dreamed of in theoretical physics. Even more unsettling was the realization regarding the geometry of this spiral. The spiral's dimensions followed a perfect golden ratio, a mathematical constant of nature. It didn't just appear once, it appeared recursively at 3 different scales within the structure. In nature, this pattern emerges in living organisms, DNA coils, galaxies, and nautilus shells, but never, ever, do we see this in cold rocks floating in deep space. It's a blueprint of organic intelligence, a fractal fingerprint of life, something we associate with design and biology, not chaos and geology. And if there's a golden spiral spinning at the heart of this thing, then the conclusion is terrifying. It's not just alive, it may be aware of its own geometry. Less than a week after the spiral discovery, a sudden dip in the object's brightness was recorded. Initially, this was thought to be rotational shadowing, a common occurrence with asteroids. But high-contrast imaging from Webb revealed something unprecedented in the history of astronomy. A section of 3i Atlas's surface had shifted, physically moving aside. It hadn't crumbled or cracked under stress, it had moved mechanically. A panel, rectangular, smooth, and reflective, had retracted, revealing a dark cavity within. No natural comet or asteroid has ever displayed mechanical motion of this magnitude. The retraction was clean, symmetrical, and permanent, implying a door opening. Inside the newly exposed cavity, infrared scans detected no debris and no gas. There was no thermal chaos, just a void of perfect stillness. Instead, there was stability, a space engineered to remain cold and dark. It looked like a chamber or a cradle, waiting for something to occupy it. Scientists were divided on what this opening represented. Was this an exhaust port, a sensor array, or a hatch for a probe? Whatever it was, it had opened specifically toward Earth. And as the object continued on its course, that opening remained locked on our planet like an eye. It wasn't passive, it wasn't just observing the stars. It was targeting us, maintaining a lock despite the rotation of the object, and inside that cavity, a secondary pulse began to emerge. This new signal was different in tone, slower, but significantly stronger. It was a second heartbeat, distinct from the first. Something else had awakened inside the shell of 3I Atlas. As if all this weren't enough, NASA's Ames Research Center made one final discovery that reframed everything. Using advanced data correlation between JWST's readings and Earth-based spectral databases, they found a match. They identified trace compounds in the object's emission spectrum that matched terrestrial biopolymers. These were not exactly DNA, but molecules so similar in structure that the distinction was blurry. They acted as synthetic analogs of organic tissue, bridging the gap between life and machine. It looked like lab-grown hybrid material designed to mimic life, but far more advanced. These polymers weren't passive chemical chains floating in space. They responded to solar radiation by altering shape at a molecular level. This suggests programmability, acting like living circuits that react to their environment. We've only begun to experiment with this on Earth in high-tech biotech labs, but 3I Atlas is built with it, utilizing technology we are centuries away from mastering. The lines between biology and engineering blur completely inside this object. It's not alive in the way we understand life, breathing and eating. Nor is it a machine in the way we define technology, cold and rigid. It is both, or perhaps something beyond both categories entirely. It is a vessel, a seed, a being, and a message encoded in physical form. And if that message is waking up now, we face a critical uncertainty. The question is no longer what is inside the shell. The question is what happens when it gets out of that shell. By now it was clear that 3I Atlas was no accidental traveler wandering the stars. But then came the most disturbing revelation yet regarding its path. Using historical gravitational lensing data combined with recent motion analysis, a pattern emerged. A group of independent physicists noticed a subtle but undeniable correlation in the data. The object's current trajectory wasn't unique to this moment in time. In fact, a nearly identical path had been recorded before in our history. It wasn't recorded by human instruments, but by ancient geological formations. Marks on Mars, on Europa, and even on Earth seemed to align with this specific vector. Megastructures like the pyramids of Giza, the Nazca lines, and Martian ridges showed alignments. These sites, long thought to be coincidental or natural, pointed to the precise vector 3I Atlas now follows. This was no coincidence. The statistical probability is virtually zero. It was as if the object had passed through before eons ago. Its arrival had been carved into stone by civilizations long gone, or perhaps long manipulated. Scientists began speaking of gravitational memory, the idea that space-time remembers motion. But if this object had been here before, then the implications are staggering. It's not just visiting us for the first time, it's returning. And the real question becomes, what happened the last time it was here? In a desperate effort to understand the object's nature, scientists tried a last-ditch experiment. They used the massive chime array in Canada to broadcast a wideband silence pulse toward 3I Atlas. This was a method designed not to speak, but to listen for a vacuum response. It's a method theorized to expose artificial voids, like using sonar to find rooms behind walls. When the signal reached the object, the result was shocking and immediate. For 6.3 seconds, 3I Atlas absorbed all detectable frequencies without returning a trace. There was no reflection, no refraction, just pure silence swallowing our signal. Then, on the 7th second, it emitted a single return pulse. But this wasn't just any pulse. It matched a specific historical record. It exactly matched a 1977 anomaly known as the WOW signal. Once believed to be the strongest candidate for extraterrestrial contact, it was now back. The implications were devastating for anyone who knew the history of SETI. Either the object had captured that signal across time and replayed it deliberately to mock us, or it was the original source of the transmission, finally revealing itself. Suddenly, what we thought was a cold traveler became a possible origin point of contact. It was like a ghost replaying its own message from the past. But if 3I Atlas was the broadcaster in 1977, who was the intended receiver? With fear mounting among those closest to the data, an unofficial task force formed. This was a blend of astrophysicists, linguists, exobiologists, and philosophers. Their findings, though unpublished, leaked into the scientific underground almost immediately. The patterns encoded in the object's pulses weren't random mathematics. They followed a symbolic structure known as a recursive universal grammar. This is a system of meaning that transcends language, math, and biology. In essence, it was a template for intelligence itself, a code for consciousness. More alarming, this template showed signs of emergent self-reference. In simpler terms, the signal wasn't just communicating, it was talking about itself. Researchers believe 3I Atlas may contain a non-human consciousness. This mind is not stored in databanks or circuits as we understand them. It is embedded in geometry, light, and resonance. A mind made of physics. The object is not simply alive, it is likely aware of us, not just because we observed it, but because it had already factored us into its design. It acts as if its journey through our solar system was always meant to trigger recognition, not recognition from us, but recognition from within itself. It feels as if it had come home to a place it remembers. Then came the last twist, the one that defies standard physics. Observatories worldwide began reporting something even more unexpected in the background stars. They noted subtle variations in star positions around the object. These weren't massive shifts, and they weren't immediately visible to the naked eye. But they were real, measurable deviations in the fabric of the sky. The fixed stars that guide everything from GPS satellites to ancient navigators had shifted. They moved by fractions of arcseconds, a tiny amount with huge implications. Too small to affect daily life, but large enough to trigger alarms in every astrophysical model. When triangulated, the distortions all converged in a way that warped time signatures near 3I Atlas. A team from the University of Tokyo ran predictive simulations on this lensing effect. They reached a chilling conclusion that suggests high-level manipulation of reality. The object was not just distorting light or gravity like a massive planet, it was subtly bending space-time around itself, creating a local bubble. It wasn't enough to form a wormhole or a black hole, but it was significant. It was enough to suggest a localized manipulation of the fabric of reality. The only known entities capable of that are black holes, the destroyers of the universe. But 3I Atlas doesn't devour matter. It orchestrates it. It reshapes the sky, not as a side effect of mass, but as a deliberate act. It is writing a message across the stars by bending the light that reaches us. Something is emerging, and it's rewriting not only what we know of the cosmos, it is rewriting how the cosmos has always seen us. As data from 3I Atlas continued to stream in, a team at CERN attempted a radical approach. They fed the object's signal pulses through a harmonic resonance model. This model is typically used to predict quantum decoherence in particle collisions. What emerged from the supercomputer stunned everyone in the room. The object's emissions created perfect harmonic structures when mapped across multidimensional phase space. This is something that only happens in tightly tuned physical systems. It resembles the harmonics of musical instruments or atomic clocks, not random space rocks. But then, during a session on September 2nd, the signal collapsed. It turned into chaotic noise, only to reform seconds later into an entirely new harmonic mode. This wasn't a glitch in the software or the receiver. It was a modulation, a deliberate change in frequency and tone. It was as if the object had detected the analysis and responded. It altered its internal structure to avoid pattern recognition by our computers. This level of awareness isn't just reactive, it's highly adaptive. It acts like a living intelligence, protecting its core secrets from prying eyes. Researchers began referring to this moment as the veil. It was the first indication that 3I Atlas wasn't just being observed by us, it was deciding exactly what we were allowed to see and when. As the object's velocity and trajectory were refined, something deeply troubling emerged. According to orbital mechanics and known astrophysical constraints, the numbers didn't add up. 3I Atlas would have had to originate from a region of interstellar space nearly 100 light-years away. Yet, based on its current speed and path, the timeline was impossible. It would have taken over 500,000 years to arrive here at sublight speeds, unless it accelerated at some point during the journey, cutting the travel time. But there was no evidence of deceleration upon entering the solar system. There was no detectable fuel source to explain such a journey. No ion tail consistent with propulsion was ever seen trailing behind it. The math was impossible unless time itself had been altered during the trip. A small team at MIT proposed an outrageous theory to explain the discrepancy. 3I Atlas may have used time dilation to traverse space faster than light, not by breaking relativity, but by bending around it, surfing the waves of space-time. That would make it not just a visitor from another star system, it would make it a temporal traveler, a vessel out of time. It is something that crossed time as easily as it crossed distance. And if it has done this before, then it possesses a terrifying perspective. It may have seen civilizations rise and fall, including ours. One of the most unexpected discoveries came not from a scientist, but from an artist. Lucia Fain, a data sculptor who visualizes astronomical data, was working with the files. She uses 3D rendering algorithms to turn raw numbers into visual shapes. When she plotted the structural geometry of the object's internal resonance, she froze. She was looking at the harmonic data from the previous week, the veil incident. She noticed something that shouldn't be there, hidden in the math. A recurring geometrical pattern emerged, resembling a face. It was not human, but symmetrical, elongated, and deeply alien. At first her render was dismissed as pareidolia, a trick of the mind. We have a tendency to see patterns where none exist, like faces in clouds. But further analysis confirmed that the resonance data did encode the pattern deliberately. It was repeated at several scales, embedded in the signal like a watermark. The object was broadcasting a shape, a symbolic form of identity. It was sending a face, a mind, a presence into the void. Whether it was a creator, a pilot, or a representation of the intelligence within, no one could say. But now the message was no longer just mathematical or mechanical. It was visual, emotional, and deeply personal. It was trying to be recognized, and the face was staring back at us. In a final attempt to understand the object, the James Webb team focused all available instruments. They targeted one specific area near the spiral core of 3I Atlas. What they found wasn't a heat source or a signal emitter. It was a region that defied all known laws of reflection and optics. Light entered this specific zone, but didn't return to the sensors. It wasn't absorption like a black body, it was containment. It was as if the area functioned as a light trap, holding the photons. Or worse, it functioned as a data vault, storing information in light. When they mapped the surrounding gravitational field, they discovered something even more shocking. The mass density of the object suggested an interior far larger than its physical volume. It was like a TARDIS effect, where internal space exceeds external boundaries. If this was true, 3I Atlas could contain a massive archive. Not an archive of matter, but of memory and history. It could be a record, a museum, or perhaps a seed bank of civilizations. It might be holding the codes of worlds encoded in light and time, everything waiting to be awakened by the right key. But the archive was sealed, locked by a geometry no human code had cracked. And maybe it was never meant to be opened by force. Perhaps it opens only when we prove we are the key it has been waiting for. For centuries, humanity has stared into the night sky, searching for answers. We have looked for clues about our origins and our place in the universe. We have asked the eternal question, are we truly alone in this dark ocean? We sent signals, built telescopes, and dreamed of visitors descending from the stars. But never did we imagine that something might already be watching us. We never thought something was waiting for us to simply look closely enough. 3I Atlas didn't just drift into our solar system by accident. It arrived with purpose, with rhythm, and with deep memory. It pulsed like a heart in the cold vacuum. It answered like a mind when we spoke to it. It shifted its course to meet us, like it knew exactly who we are. And now, as it moves silently past Mars, still glowing from within, still emitting signals we barely understand and cannot decode. The question is no longer what it is, metal or rock. The question is what it wants from us and whether we were ever supposed to uncover it at all. Is it a probe sent to study us? Is it a messenger carrying a warning? Is it a relic of a dead world? Or is it something else entirely, something we have no name for? Something alive, not in the way we define life, but in a way that redefines us? Because maybe 3I Atlas wasn't meant to reach Earth. Maybe Earth was always meant to reach it. And now that we've seen it, recognized it, and touched it with our machines, one terrifying truth echoes louder than any signal from space. We've already been noticed by the universe, and once you've been noticed, you can't go back to being alone. If this sent chills down your spine, you're not the only one. What if the greatest discovery in human history didn't come from a signal we sent? What if it came from a silent object already on its way to us? Subscribe to Space Atlas for more breaking revelations as this story unfolds. Let us know in the comments below what you think is happening. Do you believe 3i Atlas is alive, a sentient traveler? Or is it something worse, something built and abandoned by gods? I'm the angry astronaut, and stay tuned because the sky is waking up